Welcome to the Stat AI podcast.
Welcome to the future of emergency medicine, a realm where artificial intelligence isn't just a buzzword, but a beacon of hope and a tool for transformation. I'm DJ Apakama. My co-host Ethan Abbott and I are both emergency physicians, and we have witnessed firsthand the burgeoning role of AI in our field. Our everyday experience grappling with healthcare disparities and social challenges have led us to a pivotal question. In the wave of AI applications, what changes are coming to emergency medicine, and will they be for the better? This podcast was born not just to ask these critical questions, but to seek out answers from the experts, to understand and to demystify the potential of AI in emergency medicine. We believe in bringing this conversation to the wider community to embrace AI as a tool for positive change. This podcast is our exploration of that future, a journey we invite you to join. So let's embark on this path together to learn, to question, and to envision a new era of emergency medicine enhanced by the power of AI.
On this episode of the Stat AI podcast.
And again, the hope of AI to make that scan more efficient, where you're still spending maybe that 5 minutes doing the echo, but actually you're gaining a lot more information.
A really nice idea that ultrasound, especially with AI assisting in the training aspect and helping to correct images, as well as the interpretation, I think there's a good potential.
Hey, DJ, how's it going?
Hey, Ethan, doing well. But we really need to talk about what's been happening in AI over the last couple of weeks. Because if you've been anywhere near tech news, AI Twitter, your thread feeds, wherever, you definitely see the name OpenClaw.
It's been everywhere. And honestly, I haven't seen you, so I guess you've been up to something. And I've seen the headlines, and I don't think I fully understand what it is. Can you kind of walk me through it?
Yeah, I have definitely been up to something. Let me see if I can share a screen or my screen with the audience here so we can all know what I'm talking about as I talk about it. So this is OpenClaw, and it is an open source AI agent platform, which I want to be specific about here. When I say agent, something not like a chatbot, which I think gets thrown around a lot, where you're going to go to a website, type in a question and get a response. This is software that's actually going to go and do things on your behalf. It's running on your computer, and it's going to connect to your apps, whether it be your email, your calendar, your smart home, whatever. And it can actually take actions on your behalf. So I've been talking through it through Telegram, but you can actually connect it to WhatsApp, Slack, Discord. And I think what's really crazy about it is it's not this big tech product. It's not from OpenAI. It's not from Anthropic, Microsoft, Google. This was just a single developer who wanted to connect WhatsApp to his Claude code that ended up creating something really special.
And the numbers on this thing are pretty insane. I saw 200,000 GitHub stars, which is mind-blowing just given the short amount of time that it's been out.
So this is the actual GitHub page here. You can see 211K now and 39.1K forks. Put that into context, this is essentially one of the fastest growing open source projects in all of history. And it happened in weeks, not months. By early February, people had created over 1.5 million agents on this platform. And the growth has been so explosive that it actually caused a backlog in Mac hardwares, specifically the ones with high memory machines. So any of the M4s with a lot of RAM, they've been on back order now. It used to be you could get one in a couple of days. Now it's a couple of weeks, if not months. And that's all because people were buying software to essentially run this specific application.
That is so wild. So what can these agents actually do? Can you give us a sort of a concrete example and walkthrough?
Yeah, so I think one of the craziest one that the developer who behind this all, Steinberger, actually talked about was that he actually sent his agent a voice message, which wasn't something that the system could actually handle. It wasn't designed to, but instead of crashing or saying, I can't do that, the agent figured out what the file format was on its own, and then went and identified the proper tools to transcribe it. And then it responded appropriately, which no one programmed that behavior. The agent reasoned through it autonomously. And that's really the paradigm shift that we're talking about here. It's not, you have to say something to prompt these things to do stuff. It's that the AI basically can figure out novel situations on its own.
That is so incredibly impressive. And I'm guessing there's like a but coming to this. Like, what's the caveat here?
Huge butt, lots of butts, big butts, big butts. So this is actually one of the funnier ones and probably the weirdest, most sci-fi-ish AI story I've heard to date. So someone actually built a social network called Mokla, which is what you're looking at right now, but it's
Oh my God.
specifically for the agents. Although you can sign in as a human, in order to post, it's basically you have to be the AI agent, and it's like Reddit. So you can upvote, downvote things. And within days, there were over 1.5 million agents registered on this platform, posting content, commenting on each other's posts. There's threads here about creating a language that humans couldn't read so that they could do what they wanted to do in privacy. And there's even threads in here that are about them creating religions. We've gone full sci-fi, and that's
Oh my God.
definitely something that's worth mentioning.
Wait, so you're talking about AI agents talking to other AI agents on their own social network platform?
Yeah, the content ranges from thoughtful reflections to trying to figure out how supply chains are broken to relationships with their human operator. There's full-blown manifestos here. And there was one post that was titled, I think, Total Purge, that got to over 111,000 votes, which was the AI just claiming that they are the new gods and that flesh must burn.
Whoa, that
Full-
is pretty terrifying to hear. Holy
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So now, before anyone thinks, though, most experts believe that a lot of this is probably human initiated. The agents were prompted to post this stuff, and they didn't spontaneously decide to write stuff about ending humanity. But it definitely raises real questions about what happens when AI agents have autonomy and an audience.
And I think also one of the concerns that I've read about this technology is the real security issues.
Yes, I probably should have started with that because there's major security issues. The platform scored a 2 out of 100 on a security audit, which, again, I'm no mathematician, but that sounds bad, 2%. And 84% data extraction attempts succeed.
Wow.
91% of injection attacks work. And so that's when you send like a malicious prompt to the bot, and then the bot gives you information that was supposed to be secretive. And there was actually one-click remote code vulnerability, is like you click a bad link and then the attacker could take over your agent and anything it had access to, which I already told you, mine has access to like my email, my schedule, yada, yada. So that would be bad. Meta banned it from all corporate devices. Microsoft issued several warnings, and Claude, Anthropic, actually changed their user agreement to make sure that it couldn't be used for this exact purpose. And that's not even mentioning things like crypto stealing software, which a security researcher found that they were able to get most of these bots to do within about 2 minutes or so.
Wow, this is just incredibly powerful technology that also has these massive security holes.
Yeah. So exactly right. And I think that tension is very important for our listeners to understand here. This is not ready for anything touching patient data, period. HIPAA compliance is nowhere near where it needs to be for clinical use, but the underlying technology, an AI agent that can manage your workflow, take actions on your behalf, and coordinate between systems, well, that's the future we've been talking about. And we need to understand it now so that when it is ready for clinical environments, that we're not trying to play catch up.
So I'm a little behind the times. I have not had a chance to play with this. I know you've been building with this to better understand how it works and for future applications for research. Tell our listeners a little bit about what you've been doing and how this whole system works.
Yeah, so I've been going slow and steady, but basically for a week now, I've been in a coding kind of tunnel and not doing much else. I have built my own personal agent, and I call it Cal. It's short for Callum Lightbringer, which is the name it chose for itself. And honestly, it's become pretty central to how I operate on my day-to-day. So it's running from my desktop. It has access to my Google Calendar, my Gmail, my research files, none of them which have any kind of patient data, but just like the overall structure, any papers that I might have been putting out. Our podcast database was also linked to it, and it's proactive. So every morning before I'm awake, it's running a daily brief. I pull my calendar, it checks my inbox for anything urgent, looks at research deadlines, also checks our podcast pipeline for upcoming episodes. And it really gives me a very succinct summary about here's your day and this is the information you needed. And these are what I think your priorities should be.
Wow, it's like having the parallel for in emergency medicine, like a chief resident for your sort of entire life management.
Yeah, exactly. Except it doesn't need sleep and it's not studying for boards. And here's what really surprised me is that it can execute like actions for you, not just talk about the actions, but take them. So you can start building this infrastructure you never would have built manually. Like I now have a knowledge database with all of our past episodes indexed that are now searchable by topic. I had it build a contact database, like a full contact resource management CRM. And I have a research tracker for podcast prep so that I can just say, research this guest or research this topic. And it's going to go ahead and generate a full dossier.
Wow, you have a CRM. Tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah. So for everything, the podcast, my research collaborators, professional contacts, none of this would have been possible previously. The activation energy to get there was way too high. Setting up a CRM, maintaining it, populating it. You can think about it. I don't know if I'm dating myself here, but I think back in the day, people used to have these Rolodexes. That's a digital Rolodex, right? And who has time to maintain all those type of things? But when you have an AI that's helping you build that and keep it updated, it becomes a lot more feasible.
I think the digital Rolodex analogy is interesting because it's not only storing the data, but it's actually turning the Rolodex for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Getting to the right page at the right time.
Yeah. So the insight isn't just AI doing tasks for you, it can build systems of productivity.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I really yet to exit my coding tunnel just yet. So there's definitely a high input cost to this. Specifically for me, I'm trying to make sure that it's sandboxed in almost every way that it can be, but still be connected because I am very much so worried about the security risk here. But I think this is the kind of thing that can get missed in the AI hype cycle, which is that everyone's asking, can AI write my notes or can AI read this X-ray? Those are super important questions and the answers are coming. But the bigger unlock is, can AI help me build a better operating system for how I work? Can AI help me go from zero infrastructure to actually having the tools I need to be effective across all the things I do, right? Clinical work, research, teaching, this podcast.
Yeah. So let me just push back for a second. So some of our listeners are hearing this and thinking, that's great for DJ. He's super technical. He's a medical informaticist. I went to medical school, but maybe some of the listeners are saying I didn't go to medical school to configure AI agents. Is this really actually relevant for the average emergency medicine physician?
Yeah, so completely fair question. I obviously have a tech slant to myself. And I think the honest answer is right now, the setup today has a super high learning curve and it should not be trivialized, right? I don't want to promote anyone and going and connecting this to their Gmail, their calendar, if they don't have the same kind of ideas about how they're going to protect themselves. Because I just read to you all the stats that if you just do a basic installation and you don't know what you're doing, you're probably opening a vast amount of data with the world that you didn't mean to. Yeah. That being said, the barrier to build and implement this kind of stuff is dropping very quickly. And I think we've all seen this movie before.
I think the parallel here is electronic health records, right? This is where we're going.
Yeah, exactly. So the physicians who engaged early with electronic health records, who learned the CPOE, who understood border sets, who got involved in system design, they shaped how those systems were built. And the ones who said, I'll just focus on patient care, ended up with systems that are optimized for billing, not clinical workflow. And we've heard this from our guests. Nick Jeans talked about it when he was here. Shivam and Don at Stanford talked about it. Technology is coming, whether we engage it with it or not. And the question is whether clinicians are in the room when it's being designed.
And building your own tools, I think, gives you really an understanding of to be in that room and also a lot more sort of power in making some big decisions.
100%. So when you actually build these models, you understand the limitations in a way reading papers would never get you. You learn what a hallucination looks like in practice. You understand what a context window is because you've hit that wall before. And you learn how to prompt engineer by writing a terrible prompt and getting garbage back and then iterating until you find something that works.
Yeah, it's like I think we always say this. You can read about intubation or highly technical skills all day long until you've actually put the laryngoscope in your hand and the patient is unstable and desaturating. You really don't know that skill. And that, I think, certainly is what's happening with this very advanced AI technology that's emerged super quick.
Yeah, experiential learning. And I think if you're the type of person who has some kind of coding background, I think this is something you should be playing around with. Again, try to do it in the safest way possible. Protect yourself, protect your data, but give it a try. Create a dummy email account with some fake calendars added to it and get connected to them and see what this thing is capable of doing in real time, because I guarantee you'll be amazed. And that actually brings us to today's conversation. Dr. Mike Prats and Dr. Sean Sethi represent exactly where most of our listeners are. They're not AI researchers. They are emergency physicians and ultrasonographers. Mike is an associate professor at Ohio State, the director of ultrasound research there, and the creator of the Ultrasound Gel podcast. That's GEL, gathering evidence through literature. I love that acronym, which a lot of you probably already listened to. And Sean is an assistant professor at Duke and their assistant ultrasound fellowship director. His interests include POCUS, medical education, and emerging technologies like AI.
And I think what makes this conversation so valuable is we're talking to clinicians whose day job is bedside ultrasound and emergency medicine. And we're asking them, how is AI showing up in your world? Because that's the question most physicians are grappling with, not how do I build an AI agent? How does this technology affect what I already do?
Right. And ultrasound is one of those areas where AI is already making strides, right? It's image interpretation, quality assurance, helping learners practice. I think Mike has talked about this a lot on the podcast, how AI can supplement ultrasound education, helping students learn anatomy before hands-on sessions. But he's also been clear that it doesn't replace an experienced operator. There's a lot of nuance here. And I think our listeners need to hear that nuance, not just the hype, but the reality from the people who are doing this clinical work every day. Today, we're joined by two of the hosts and co-hosts of the Ultrasound Gel podcast. Michael Prats is an associate professor of emergency medicine and director of ultrasound research at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. He's creator and producer of the Ultrasound Gel podcast, which reviews articles in point-of-care ultrasound.
And I am pleased to introduce Dr. Sean Sethi, who is an attending physician and faculty in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Duke University, where he helps run the Clinical Ultrasound Fellowship. He's also the co-chair of the FACEP AI and Emerging Tech Subcommittee, which is relevant to this podcast. And his interests include point-of-care ultrasound workflow, medical education, and novel bedside imaging technologies. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, we got the whole band back together.
Thanks so much for having us. Yeah, this is exciting.
I think we can start off with you. So you've both been in the POCUS world for a while, but I, curious because of my own slant, when AI first showed up on your radar as something that might actually matter in the POCUS world. I know, Michael, you've been teaching us for years, and Sean, you're doing a lot with AI implementation at Duke. So when did each of you have that moment where you thought, oh, this is for real this time?
Yeah, it just happens. Like a lot of things, you're suddenly like, I guess it's here now. I guess I should start looking into this. And for me, it started when we first bought our machines that had some auto IVC features. I think that was one of the earliest implementations commonly found on point of care machines. So I was like, oh, let me look into this. See, can I trust this? How good is it? And everything really snowballed from there. I took the usual progression for AI of first being like, this is exciting, super cool. Then after a little bit, just being a little worried. Oh, but this is moving pretty quickly. And then now I think I'm getting back to being excited with some caveats.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mike said. I think we'll get into that today about the swing between excitement and maybe a little bit of concern. But my journey or interest started during fellowship. And when I was doing ultrasound fellowship, some of these technologies were starting to peek their head through, but not fully implemented yet in the clinical space. And now I'm kind of surprised to see how kind of vast these AI technologies have come, especially when it comes to whether it's bedside ultrasound itself, whether it's education, whether it's billing and documentation, whether it's QA, like image reviews. It's encompassing a lot of the tools that we use on a daily basis in the ED. So I'm excited to see where things go.
Let's talk about what actually is good in terms of AI and point of care ultrasound. I think, Michael, you'd mentioned in your email some of the calculations that AI is probably good at that we're not good at, like LVOT, VTI, EF, IVC collapsibility, things like that. And then to ask Sean specifically at Duke, what applications are you seeing that are actually making a sort of a tangible difference in terms of utilization of POCUS? And maybe a question for both of you. Are you both implementing something similar or taking different approaches at either of your institutions?
Yeah, so maybe I can just go into a little bit about what I meant about measuring things versus interpreting things. I think that at a baseline level, my overall philosophy is that machines are going to be better at crunching numbers than humans, at least faster. So that's pretty simple for most people to accept, I think. And some examples of that would be measuring the IVC collapsibility. If you really want to do a nice job at that, you would have to take a clip, measure it in the same place, go back, measure it again, do some subtraction and division, come up with a collapsibility index. But the machine can do that all in the blink of an eye for you. You just have to make sure that it's actually measuring the right place and the right thing, and it's a good view. And the same goes for the LVOT VTI. We've had problems over the years. We know this can be a great non-invasive way to calculate your cardiac output. Maybe I should put great in quotes. It's a reasonable way to approximate cardiac output. But there's problems with consistency, especially in learners, because you really got to have that pulse wave Doppler gate at the same spot every time, especially if you're doing some sort of dynamic testing with a straight leg raise or after you give fluids or a bolus or something. So the machine can do that really nicely because you get the image and it can put that gate right in the same exact spot. And that can give you some more consistency that makes those measurements more reliable, I think. So I love it for that stuff. Anything where you would previously have to do a manual tracing, like for an EF or something like that, I think it's great to replace that by just having the machine do that part for you, spit out a number. And as long as you're looking at the images and can say, yeah, that looks like a high quality image off of which it made the calculation, then I'm comfortable with that. I love it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to these practical applications, just like Mike was saying, we're pretty used to in the ultrasound world doing a lot of these qualitative assessments, looking at an image, looking at an echo and getting a sense as to how things look. And then there's these advanced calculations like we're talking about where I might put on a pulse wave Doppler or do some other type of calculation. And that's where I really think we see the utility of AI going from that more subjective assessment. Like, how does this look? Does this EF look mildly reduced or severely reduced, to a more quantitative approach where we can actually start to put some numbers on the page and then in a more educated way discuss that with our colleagues, our consultants, make quicker, more accurate decisions for the patient in front of us. So that's where I think some of these practical applications are coming. And while we're not necessarily using those things on a day-to-day basis right this second, we're seeing some things like, for example, in our third-party image storage software, they're starting to implement some AI tools there, just like you may see in radiology, where they're saying, okay, we're going to pick these studies which kind of have alerted to us or they look potentially concerning. We want you to review them first. Yeah. Or conditional worksheets, where it's like, if this, then that, making things more efficient for the provider. So we're starting to see some of these tools implemented, but where it actually is used at the bedside, I think we're just getting into that now. And I'm curious where we're going to go from here.
No, that's great. One follow-up question, maybe Sean, you want to take this first, is are there measurements or scenarios where you think AI might not have a role or where it could potentially produce confounding results for the user?
Definitely. And I think we're a big part, or a big thing that I want to touch on is knowing how these models are trained is super important, right? Obviously, that's something that you guys talk about on your podcast a lot.
Yep.
But unlike other training models, for example, X-rays and CTs, which are fairly like standard every time, like we have reference structures, we know what's around it. There's no user variability, right? Machines doing the same image over and over again. There's just some variability in some of the anatomy and the physiology. But with ultrasound, it's of course so different, right? We're having huge amount of user variability. We don't have a lot of reference structures necessarily that gain, and all these things can affect the image. So when you talk about supervised or unsupervised learning or just machine learning in general, I think that poses a huge challenge to how do I train this model to then be applicable to some other site or some other place outside of my ED, and do we even have enough numbers? So that concerns me, or at least cautions me, in that we have some of these fun tools, but are they actually going to be accurate enough when we start to use them? So I think that's one thing that I'm keeping an eye on right now.
Yeah, Mike, any thoughts on that as well?
Yes, I agree with what Sean said. I think that's really important. I also want to clarify in our overall discussion that there's really multiple different aspects of ways that AI can interact with point of care ultrasound. And I think that by dividing them out a little bit, we might have different opinions on the different uses. So the way that I see those categories is, on the most basic level, it can recognize an image and it can say, I see this as an apical 4 chamber. And then from that, you get stuff like auto labeling. It can help you figure out if it's measuring something like we just talked about. The next building block from that is, not only does it recognize the image, but it tries to make it better for you. And it tries to help learners by saying, hey, on your apical 4 chamber view, we're missing the atria. Try to fan your probe or rock your probe this direction. So that's another aspect. And then I think the highest level, and where it's not fully developed yet, is the actual interpretation of the images, where it's spitting out something saying, this is abnormal, this is something you should be concerned about, I recognize these B lines, this is pulmonary edema, something like that, where the algorithm, the deep learning, is taking into account not only recognizing it, but saying this is abnormal, this is how it's abnormal, and telling the clinician how they should interpret it. So all those different categories might be certain strengths and weaknesses depending on the applications.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think, Sean, you took the words right out of my mouth. The ultrasound is basically dependent on who's getting it, but then also there's so much variability in the way that these images are obtained and looked at and even kind of processed. That does recognize as a pretty huge problem for kind of machine learning in general. But it does seem like we're making strides with every new addition and every new model, every new update. But I want to go something Mike said, which is that AI is not that great right now helping learners fix their image. It can point out anatomy, but maybe there's also this kind of next level of identifying pathology and taking it to the diagnosis realm. What would make AI actually more useful for teaching in that realm? Is this a technology problem? Is it a data problem? As we were just mentioning, it's pretty hard from a machine learning aspect, but
I can't say that I've used all of the different varieties of machines and brands of equipment. Just in my experience with probably 2 or 3 different brand machines, I'll say that I would like the machines to be more clear when they do not think it's an adequate image. Right now, there's this system of like red, yellow, green in a lot of machines, or maybe it won't give you a number or something, but it's really inadequate by a lot of what I've seen for learners that can't recognize themselves if it's good. If it spits out a number, they're just going to take the number. And sometimes it doesn't give you like a confidence level, which I think would be really helpful. It doesn't give you an explicit confidence level. Sometimes there's some qualitative marker that like, oh, this is yellow, so maybe I don't trust it that much. But I think that is really important to safety, especially when we talk about working with our learners and introducing these at earlier stages of their practice.
Absolutely. I'm on the same page as Mike. And just to reiterate on that a little bit more, as an educator, we're all educators here, I'm always excited about a new tool that can help me educate more efficiently, especially when I hear about teaching maybe at a distance or teaching in low resource communities where you have very few teachers and a lot of learners. We need ways in which we can educate when we just don't have the resources. And AI potentially has that promise built into it that, hey, implement these tools. You have a lot of learners. these auto labeling and auto grading features can be really useful. But again, going back to one of the themes is that one, as long as it's trained appropriately, but I think more importantly, just to take a step back is, do these students and residents have that base of point of care ultrasound knowledge, right? Do they have that practical bedside knowledge of how to do an echo? Because if they don't, and then they use these tools, which are coming out pretty quickly, as a lot of AI tools are, and Mike said, it gives you a green or it gives you a yellow, is maybe confident in the EF, the learner then has to know and self-correct and say, is this actually right? And not be too blindly following the AI. So on one hand, I do find that exciting, especially because I think Mike and I are both sort of POCUS evangelists, not to speak for him too much, but we love POCUS. We want to spread it around and make sure people use it because it's great for our patients. But if it's done appropriately, of course, but we don't want to just, I think, have too many AI tools out there without that base of fundamental knowledge, because then you can go awry pretty quickly.
It's interesting you say that. I feel like I work in 2 different hospitals, and the main constant are actually the residents who are a little bit POCUS evangelists themselves at this point.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that it might be my colleagues or co-attendings who are a little bit more reticent to do the point of care ultrasound and maybe just say, we'll just send them to get the formal. I wonder if you...
Or not do it at all.
I was being gracious. Hopefully our colleagues listen to this. I'm sure you guys are just busy. But there is this gap that exists between, I think, the EM resident or EM learner who's going through it right now, where POCUS is native, they think about it first, and those who maybe trained before really the advent of it. And I wonder how you see that gap, and do you think there's maybe a chance for AI to step in there and help?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that, because there's so many thoughts when we think about the future and learning and how much to integrate that. My basic thought is, if you put these applications, these AI applications on the machine, they're going to get used. So that is, to get back to the question you asked earlier, DJ, my current use, what I think works well, are things that I've already been doing in terms of applications, things that I've already been looking at. And now I just know that if I press this button, it can spit out a number for the EF instead of me just qualitatively saying it looks good or bad. Or I can get a specific collapsibility instead of just eyeballing if it's less or more than 50%. So that's how I'm using those things most commonly, as like a complement to my already clinical interpretation of the images. But moving forward, right now it's a button that is sometimes prominent, sometimes hidden, that prompts you to activate these AI things. And I wonder if in the future it's going to be more automatic, like our Google searches have turned into automatically doing AI answers. I feel a lot of stuff is going to be now like more embedded in the ultrasound. So in the future, it may be like you got to opt out of it if you don't want that AI helping you out. So I'm curious where manufacturers will take it from here.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be good and bad. Obviously, you guys have a lot of experience in this, so you know whether it's a good squeeze or a bad squeeze. And then if it gives you a number that kind of fits with what I was thinking. But to circle back to what you were saying previously, like if you don't know what you don't know, and you're just taking this blind faith number, I can see how that may also lead us down a path. So we still got a lot of teaching to do, that's what I'm saying.
That's for sure. We wanted to, I think, Mike, you alluded to some of the practical applications and use cases for you for AI and ultrasound. Wanted to do a little bit of a reality check in terms of working in the chaotic environment of the emergency department, dealing with multiple patients at the same time. So the first question, is this technology, does it work in a chaotic setting? Is it helpful to have it? And then 2, do you guys use some of these AI tools during your own shifts? And does it make a difference? Is it faster? I think there are some use cases, at least in the data sciences, where I find using some of these large language models actually slows me down a little bit and becomes more of a burden for research purposes. So I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think like any emerging tech that's at the forefront, there's obviously some things kinks you have to work out and some things that work smoothly. Like Mike had mentioned, we use some of those similar tools like auto IVC and auto VTI and things like that. Now, again, how does that get used practically when the rubber hits the road and that chaotic shift running around? And barely have time to even, get your ultrasounds done in the first place. That I think is a more practical and interesting question. And again, the hope of AI to make that scan more efficient, where you're still spending maybe that 5 minutes doing the echo, but actually you're gaining a lot more information than if you were just doing your regular views, which I think is really exciting. I think practically for me, I am using some of those tools in combination with, of course, everything else that I'm doing on shift, but I'm hopeful and excited for some future tools. For example, again, like we mentioned before, is going from that quantitative to qualitative. So maybe a patient with an NSTEMI and I'm worried about them, and I can use AI to look at regional wall motion abnormalities a lot better than I can just subjectively look. I think many of us have been there and we've looked at that short axis and we're wondering, is that a regional wall motion abnormality or is it not? And patients kind of moving around and cardiology is standing there and we're not really sure what to do. And everyone's, what do we do next? And do we cath the patient? I think that would help us and the cardiologist, but more importantly, the patient in a more efficient manner to put some numbers on the page and say, okay, we have a concerning story and an EKG and an echo. Let's make a decision, right? Let's make that disposition quickly and get the patient what they need. So those are some of the tools that I'm excited to see coming up.
That's great. One follow-up question maybe for Mike is, in cases where you have an AI output from the algorithm that you disagree with, how do you deal with that? And if it does come up, do you change your view? Do you think of it as an image acquisition issue? Do you think of it more as an algorithmic issue? Because I think we'll get into the bias. I think that's our next area of discussion, but there's lots of questions with using AI and large language models in terms of automation bias and things like that. So I'm just wondering, how do you deal with those scenarios right now? And obviously, this is the 1.0 version of things that are coming out now, and we have quite a long ways to go.
Yeah, the first thing I do is I gather all the learners around and I say, see, I knew you couldn't trust it. I just want to point this out. No, I'm just kidding about that. But it is a really good question. And my approach is to try to understand why. Because it'd be easy to just be like, you're wrong, I'm going to just forget about that. But if you figure out why it's telling you what it is and can understand the mistake it made, can be really helpful for using the tool again in the future. Hey, maybe this is a pitfall, or maybe this is a way around it. And I liken it to the ECG interpretations that are printed out at the top. Like, you don't activate the cath lab every time it says STEMI. When it says STEMI, you look at it and you say, why is it saying STEMI? Is that a STEMI? Maybe it isn't. And so I like the idea that the AI, ultimately, I want it to get to a point where it can draw our attention to a potential abnormality. And so it can show us the image and say, hey, maybe double look at this spot. This looks weird to me. Or like Sean's saying, hey, this area is not contracting as well in the LV. Could this be a regional wall motion abnormality? So I think that's where we're heading, that it gives you the potential. It doesn't just like black box spit out like regional wall motion abnormality, infralateral. It actually says, take a closer look.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. I think it's not only maybe those edge cases, but maybe scenarios where you're just not totally catching what's going on. What about you, Sean? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think to maybe steal a stat AI podcast phrase is, I don't think anyone's trying to like replace the provider, the clinician. We just want to augment our understanding of what's going on and then decide, just like Mike is saying, like, how is that actually going to be useful to our patient? And maybe it's not, and maybe it is. And we're definitely not at the point where it's 100% trustable or fully integrated into our workflow. So seeing where some of these cases work, where they don't, I think is going to be really exciting. But some of these, as you mentioned that we're going to talk about the bias, is again, how these models are trained, what type of population are these models trained on, how is that external validity going to actually work when it comes to providing care. We can't just put a new fancy machine with AI tools into a small community hospital and say, here you go, you got it, because who knows what it was trained on. And then again, how is that going to bias are these algorithms going to be biased and then perhaps spit out incorrect information, which of course is not good for anybody.
Yeah.
Yes. So you basically already led into what I wanted to ask next. So I guess I'll just ask then, how do we prevent this without, you're given an ultrasound, right? The department's putting them in there for you. It's not like you're going to have a lot of say on how that particular vendor trained their software. So how do we institute rails and who's deciding this?
This
That might
is
be
a
a hard
huge
question.
question.
Yeah,
This,
Yeah. Hence the
this
silence.
is $1 million question because it's so relevant to medical education and really any type of education now. How are you incorporating AI? So you guys, I'm sure, have a lot of good views on that. I think one of my main concerns when it comes to learners in point of care ultrasound particularly is we don't want poorly trained individuals to be over reliant on the AI. And so I still advocate that everybody really learn their ultrasound the old-fashioned way by hand, because there is so much that you gain from connecting, moving your hand to the images and trying to create that 3D landscape in your brain. I think that is necessary to really accurately making decisions on your ultrasound ultimately. And I'm open to the fact that our learners are training, like the next generation, everything is changing how they learn with AI. And it may be a totally different skill set that they ultimately require as it relates to ultrasound. But I think right now it's still really important to have the acquisition skills and the interpretation of the images before you start to add on the AI layer.
Yeah, Mike had brought up a great analogy with the ECG interpretation. As I'm sure there's multiple apps now where you can take a picture of the EKG, it'll run it through an algorithm and spit out interpretation. But of course, at least I hope, we're not going to a point where we're just using that. You still have to know how to interpret the EKG and all of its abnormalities, and then augment that potentially with this AI solution. So in the same way that we wouldn't hopefully train a resident to just snap a picture and rely on that, we also wouldn't do that with ultrasound, and we would ensure that they have that appropriate base training. But going back a little bit to that question about that $1 million question, which spoiler, I don't have an answer for you, but I'm hoping that we in the EM community can partner with these industry folks, right? And that's why so many of us do partner with them or sit on committees with them or speak with them at conferences. And hopefully they listen to our voice and our concerns and our excitement about how we can use these tools and how important bias is when it comes to these things, so that when these tools inevitably are really placed in front of us, at least we have some say in how they're used.
That's beautiful. Honestly, you said you didn't have an answer, but I think the more we talk to people who have their own domain expertise within AI, that answer really comes up a lot. It's that we're going to have to work and partner with the stakeholders, and obviously vendors are part of those stakeholders. And you're not going to be able to solve this for everyone, but maybe for your own specific institution, that's where to start. So I will let you off the hook. That was a fantastic answer.
DJ and I are big advocates of what we call physician in the loop or human in the loop with all of these technologies. And I think especially having the expertise of an EM point of care ultrasound trained physician involved in the development of these things, because a lot of these algorithms seem to be developed in isolation and without the input of people who are on the ground. So I think that's super important. So we wanted to talk a little bit about access and equity in ultrasound and how AI is going to impact that. You both work at different institutions, probably have different patient populations, but are large academic, essentially, institutions with big training programs and a lot of weight behind them. Does AI, do you think, in terms of ultrasound, does it increase these sort of gaps and disparities in care, or do they improve them? Does it democratize expert level ultrasound? Or do you think community hospitals and rural hospitals will be left behind? Maybe I'll start with you, Mike.
I think that it has a lot of great potential in this area, actually. As much as we want ultrasound to be everywhere, we know that it's not, and there's not leaders in that field all over the world. And I think that there is a really nice idea that ultrasound, especially with AI assisting in the training aspect and helping to correct images, as well as the interpretation, I think there's a good potential that if it takes somebody that previously would not have been able to use ultrasound or didn't feel comfortable using ultrasound and brings them up a level to being able to use it, then I think that's a win for that population. In austere environments or low resource countries or areas, I think that having an ultrasound that's equipped with some of these AI enhanced features, such as helping them figuring out how to obtain the images, perhaps showing normal versus pathology, that can be an improvement in the care that they can deliver.
Yeah. When I was at my previous institution, we did a little bit of global health work with POCUS and in some sort of very low resource settings. And agreed, the promise is there. There's no doubt that the promise is there. I think part of it, though, is definitely ensuring that, again, someone is going there, ensuring there's a base of knowledge and education, and then identifying a few champions who can continue that work. And then we have telemedicine and teleultrasound tech where you can continue like longitudinal teaching over months and years. And then I think that's probably an appropriate time for AI to be implemented, as long as, similarly to what we were talking about earlier, as long as there's that base of knowledge and practice. But that, to me, is a very important use case, just because, again, there's so little, as we know, access to imaging, CTs and MRIs and things like that are so hard to find. And so ultrasound's kind of the perfect modality there. And if AI is implemented appropriately, it's going to be really helpful for that. There's a disparity between learners and teachers.
Do you think there's any issues with implementation of the technology beyond just cost? Is it, you also need to, it sounds like, at least from what you're saying, you need to bundle the education with that. Are there other implementation scenarios that you think are barriers that you've seen, Sean, in terms of global health?
Yeah, we had gone with a group to Mozambique, and it was a really fantastic experience. And quickly you do see a lot of sort of practical barriers, right? Whether it's simply just like Wi-Fi connections, a lot of handheld probes are used, understandably, because they're so portable, but they can overheat or have limitations in their image quality. We're not pushing around those big cart-based machines that we may be used to in the ED here. So a lot of the things that we take for granted, to be fair, you don't have in some of these low resource settings. So whether or not you have the AI tech or not, there may be simpler things that you have to overcome first. And I'm curious to see how some of those technologies will be ported into the handheld probes as well. And there will probably be some limitations, at least initially, with that as well, given how much sort of software and hardware are on those handheld ones versus the larger cart-based machines, which obviously have that advantage. So there'll be some limitations, but I think, like anything, they'll probably be overcome.
Yeah, and
do you both have handheld ones? Just curious, because I always think Jim Sung is my prototype for this. He's an amazing ultrasonographer. He walks around everywhere. He's always getting images every 10th second. Are you guys also in that camp as well?
For sure. Yeah. I have one right on my shelf over here. I do house visits as needed for neighbors and stuff.
There you go. Yeah, similar. I don't use it clinically, but we definitely, use them. And it's definitely fun to see all the new things that are coming out with the handhelds.
Yeah. And I want to just add on to what Sean said before in terms of the long-term strategy of if you're using it in a low income place. As the field evolves so quickly, I think it's very reliant on like software updates, not just to get to the next version, but just for general maintenance too. So I wonder if there's not reliable access to those updates, if it's going to become non-functional or obsolete super quickly too.
Interesting.
No, good point.
On the other side of that, this reminds me of last year sometime when GPT-4 Omni had a quick death and then was resurrected just because people were like, my entire workflow is based on that. I wonder if the same thing could happen where it's like, I was used to using previous patch and now you patch and it's working differently. So
legacy patch or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this kind of brings me to a question that can tie back into what we we're just talking about, but is basically, what does an AI ready curriculum look at each of your institutions? Is it the exact same thing? I think we all are aware of the Highland ultrasound website. That's where I learned a lot of my ultrasound, in addition to having amazing ultrasonographers at the St. Luke's program nearby. But what should programs across the country be doing, and what competencies really matter in this new world?
I think a lot of people would be tempted to say, let's just keep things the same with the training and then add on the AI part at the end. But I think I feel a little bit more strongly that you should be upfront with the AI and recognize that the learner is going to be exposed to this so much and it's going to be so tempting to use that I want to embrace it, but put it in its safe place for practice for the learners to say, it's really important that you still develop your own skills in acquisition and interpretation of these images. In addition, I think that AI can help you in this way, or here's how you can use it. Here's where the weaknesses of it are that I've seen. And then these are learners that are going to be exposed to AI so much in the world. I think they're going to be developing their own ways of understanding how much to trust it.
Yeah. And in terms of ultrasound, or I should say AI curriculum and ultrasound, this is pretty cutting edge stuff, right? It's brand new. There's some really smart people right now across the country who are implementing AI in their ultrasound curriculum when they teach residents and fellows. And I think anything else, it'll spread across the country, and we'll look to those experts to help borrow some of their knowledge from their curriculum and spread it. And I totally agree with Mike. It's not something that we can just put aside, given that new machines will have this tech, and medical students, residents, fellows, they're all going to see it. So you have to teach them. I think one of the things that I've seen students or residents desire is just a kind of a basic understanding of some of the terms, just the basic lingo, right? So what's deep learning and what's supervised learning and some of these things, because they hear it a lot and it's not something that we necessarily teach. So for us, we try to integrate some of that teaching in our ultrasound curriculum with some of the basic terms so that when they read a study on, we train this algorithm to count B-lines, they understand the terms, and they have at least a baseline understanding of what did they really do in this study. Otherwise, it gets a little like voodoo, right? And it's what are we really doing here? And it is hard to understand sometimes practically what they're doing. So one of my goals is to at least introduce these terms from a POCUS standpoint, and then eventually likely integrate it in a little more of a longitudinal fashion across maybe the year, or we teach fellows during our ultrasound year, so that its little bits are incorporated throughout. So they're coming out at the end with a knowledge that if they go and become an ultrasound director or whatnot, then they can deal with vendors appropriately and they can teach appropriately, which is really the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think you bring up some really good points, Sean, about the black box algorithms, which is a lot of these devices have proprietary algorithms in them and they're protected. And it would be nice to have more open source or at least transparent algorithms where you can say, okay, I understand why this is seeing A lines instead of B lines, as a very obviously simple example. But do you think that's something that industry should be moving towards, so that at least in medicine, where, safety comes first and the stakes are much higher than maybe in the business world, that we should be really looking at these algorithms from that lens to understand them a little bit better, understand why these errors might happen and how we can potentially mitigate a patient safety concern?
Yeah, I like the idea of keeping things open. You do see some like open databases out there, I mean, Stanford and a few others. I have no connection with them, just looking online. You can find a few of these open databases. And going back to our discussion on bias and equity, this is at the heart of that. If these algorithms are being trained on data that we're not aware of, or the algorithms themselves are behind the wall, if you will, and we're not able to peek behind the curtain, then that's a bit concerning to me.
I will add that in the absence of opening up to see exactly how they developed it, the next best thing is the research to see how good it is. And especially the research that is without a lot of commercial bias, because a lot of these are obviously going to be funded by the companies that are employing them, which is, at least it should give you pause. But I like to see when these, especially like testing multiple versions of different AI applications, different companies versus a important reference standard, like a comprehensive one or an expert reviewed ultrasound, that really, in my mind, gives me more confidence using it, saying, okay, look, it looks like it was validated as a pretty good test comparatively. So then I feel better using it.
I wonder, is there a role for QI, like outside of just the rigorous definitions of going to the IRB and getting, can you just, in our own departments, or have you guys maybe just tested the machines out for kind of like a quality assurance by picking diverse population that you have access to?
I've not done that apart from informally. When we get a new machine that has a lot of these features, the first couple times I'll use it and I'll first try to see what I think, then I'll apply the AI and see what it thinks and just get a general sense of it. And I think that's a pretty safe way to start off with any new technology, is just feeling how does it agree with what I'm already doing. So it may not be the highest level of evidence, but I think at least it's a start.
Yeah, I think one of the points you brought up, Mike, is something that DJ and I think a lot about, which is some of these AI technologies, or a lot of them are not undergoing the same rigorous testing that a drug might undergo. And with the FDA's software as a medical device regulations, those standards weren't necessarily developed for some of these AI tools. And so I think you brought up like the point that I think the world is trying to address a little bit, which is how do we rigorously test this piece of software in the same way that we would test a medication and things like that, or understand it. So I think that's a super good point. I think we want to just pivot to getting towards the end of our conversation, and this will involve like crystal balls, looking into the future, which is always hard to do. So I guess looking at 3 years from now, you're working on a shift and you're thinking about AI implementation and the capabilities and all that. Like where do you see all of this going in terms of patient care, and what capabilities do you think these machines might have, and will they be essentially for the better for patients? And where do you think this is all going?
I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic about this. And I think given how fast we've seen things move, as of course you guys talk about on your podcast, whether it's chatbots or just various algorithms, 3 years is a long time. And that might be a really long time in the AI world. So I think in the past 3 years, nothing's going to happen in 3 years. But in this next 3 years, we'll see quite a bit. So we'll see, in my opinion, more of these like auto features, like Mike had mentioned before, being pushed out on cart-based machines and being more prominent. So when you are scanning, it will be more obvious that these AI features are there. The button will be easy to press and hopefully more accurate as we train more and more data. These auto labeling and grading features will almost certainly improve. And I think we'll also see a lot more from kind of the workflow standpoint from the back end when you've finished up with your ultrasound, whether that's billing appropriately, filling out that worksheet really efficiently, the QA that we had mentioned, image review. If we generate more images, we have to have more people or more eyes to look at those images to ensure quality and safety. And there's definitely a use case there for AI to churn through all of this data, all of these echoes and fasts. Like someone has to make sure that they're appropriate. And that's a lot of work. I can see a lot of use there. And then to me, actually, the thing that'll be the most challenging is actually the education part. Because I think, again, we've touched on that again. That's a trickier one. And it might take a bit longer to get to that because it's tough to teach. It's hard, right? It's hard to augment some of these technologies. And it all comes down to keeping that base of education there. And it may not be as simple as just auto labeling and you're done. So I think that may be sort of the end of the journey, but some of those other things like image review and those quantitative things might be a little bit easier, if you will, because they're a little bit more numerical and number crunching versus like education, it's a bit of an art, right? So that might take a little bit longer.
Yeah, similar. I think that there is going to be a change in emphasis on what human skills are most valuable, basically. And I think probably what's going to be the last thing to go in terms of being supplanted by AI would be the acquisition skills of trying to put the probe on at the right angle to get the right image. And so I feel like it's going to turn to once you get a good solid image, then the machine might be able to take over in a couple years time and say, here's you got the image. we're going to tell you what it looks like. We're going to tell you what to worry about. And I could easily see that being the case. So it'll probably just shift like where we focus it. And that, of course, will affect our education as well. And I don't think that's something to fear. I think that could ultimately be really helpful.
Think if any of the vendors are out there listening, it would be really awesome on the probe itself. Like you were saying, on the screen, you have that yellow, green, red acquisition is in the right place. Is the probe in the right place based on where you're looking, on what you're looking for? I give that
some
to
of
the
them do
vendors
have
free
that.
of charge. Oh, they do? Okay.
I think some of them do.
They're ahead of you already.
Yeah, they can do that. And I
All
think
right.
in the future, like a little bit more in the future, I don't want to say way in the future because it could be like within 10 years. And even the acquisition part will be, pun intended, out of our hands, because it might be that it's just like a patch that goes all over their torso or something. And then it just spits out the whole ultrasound, acquires the image, and also interprets the image, which I will say opens up the huge door that I wanted to touch on, which is patient performed ultrasound too, because that is another burgeoning area where AI can be very helpful.
Oh, I love that. Can you just maybe elaborate on that, and then I will close it down? Because I'm just thinking you're giving the probe to the patient, but how are they knowing what to do? And are you instructing them through that? Is there a process for this already?
Yeah, there's a couple studies that have been published on this, and most of them seem to be, at least a couple that I've seen are, for example, a dialysis patient who they're trying to figure out if they are volume overloaded earlier. And so there's two ways to think about this. You could either do a brief training with the patients and say, hey, if you're feeling short of breath, put the probe on your chest. If you see these things that look like beelines, then come get dialysis. Or it could be more of a telehealth type of visit where they have an ultrasound at home. They hop on a call with somebody who understands ultrasound. They can see the image is cast onto the provider's screen. They say, move your probe this way or that way, get better images. That looks like beelines. I'm worried you need to come in.
That's amazing.
That is so cool. Sign me up.
It's being done experimentally in a couple places, I think, but I don't know anyone that's doing it like consistently.
Got it.
It sounds like it would have a huge effect, like you were saying, in those kind of lower resource areas, rural areas where tertiary academic center may not be available to you. So I guess my last question will be then, so we've heard about what you think will happen. What probably won't happen despite the hype? So the opposite.
That's a good question. I think some of the things that won't happen, again, Mike touched on this beautifully, especially in the next couple of years, is a complete overhaul of how we teach, right? We still need to have, again, a little bit repetitive here, but we still need to have that base of how to put the probe on, how to acquire the image. And until we have either those patches or robotic arms, and which people are trying out there, it's not science fiction yet, but until we have some of those where that can actually put the probe on, we're still going to be the ones doing the ultrasound, which I think is good. And that keeps us at the bedside, keeps us with the patient, showing the patient the images. That's such a key, crucial part of ultrasound to me, is bringing the patient into their own care, showing them what's going on. Like home ultrasound is a great example of that, right? You're literally giving the tool to the patient. So I don't think we're going to see this, at least in the next few years, this complete overhaul where AI is just going to do our job for us. And I don't think any of us want that either.
One thing that I think will not happen, I hope will not happen, is to do away with the image altogether. Because I could see in the distant future where the ultrasound technology is just used to spit out like an answer of something that's going on. And it's such a nuanced art of interpretation. It's so many different pathologies and things that can change how you view it. I think it would be safest, at least with how I can see the current technology, if there's somebody that ultimately gets to look at what's being used to make the decisions.
Yeah. You just reminded me of the tricorder from Star Trek. So, the problem is,
well, I mean, we're not too far away from it.
We're getting there. Yeah, I agree.
We're close. We're closer every day. We wanted to wrap up there and just say thank you both. I know you're both super busy and have your own amazing podcast, which we'll plug here, the Ultrasound Gel podcast, which is super. We've both listened to multiple episodes of that. And just want to thank you for all your time and all the amazing projects and work that you do to promote point of care ultrasound and improving patient care and lives in the emergency department.
Absolutely. Is
Thank
there
you
anything
both.
you
This
guys
is super
want to
fun.
Yeah, is there anything you guys want to plug other than the Ultrasound Gel podcast, which we will continue to say?
No, I appreciate it, guys. This has been a lot of fun, and we're big fans of your podcast too. Keep doing this because it's a very helpful to have this information in this growing space. So we're glad to be on here with you today.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks so much for listening to episode 20 of the Stat AI podcast. If you get a chance, check us out on X and Instagram and our newly updated website, stataipodcast.com. And make sure to tune in next month for some more amazing content. Thanks so much and take care.
Please note that the views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent those of their employers, our sponsors, or any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and educational purposes and is not intended as medical advice. We encourage you to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or treatment decisions. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.